You thought our next video was going to start in Palm Coast, weren't you? Nope. I went ahead and skipped it up to beautiful St. Augustine here, and we're going to explore the city today. Now, we're at the Castillo de San Martos here in St. Augustine, and I want to go explore the inside of it. However, that is the line to get in. Because they're only letting 100 people in at a time, I feel like I can explore from the outside and I can explore the city a whole lot better rather than sitting in a line for, hours. But this is one of the oldest masonry forts in the entire continental United States, and this is one of the oldest cities back into the 1500s, which I think is super cool. But we got other places to go and other things to see. Now, one thing I'm really curious about is, from an environmental standpoint, what kind of stories could this fort tell? This fort has been around since the mid-1600s. It's over almost 400 years. This fort has seen so many changes over the years, over the centuries, that if this fort was able to tell the stories of what it's seen, then maybe we'd be able to do a lot more protection for a lot of our ecosystems, because they talk about in some of the words here that this thing, its worst enemy is the environment, and so that might have some stories for us to tell about the way that it's weathered things. But I think overall it'd be really interesting to kind of see what this place looked like, what the harbor looked like, what the islands looked like, what the marshes looked like 400 years ago, 300 years ago, 200 years ago. That if these walls could talk, I think that would be a really interesting story. But I think from here, we're going to continue on and find some more places to explore. But a major part as we continue to go north here is we got to start thinking about currents and tides, because they only get bigger from here. That once we get into Georgia, like I said in my last video, or two videos ago, that the difference between low tide and high tide is only going to get bigger from here, especially in Georgia. It can be upwards of 9 feet, which is going to create some huge currents. So we got to time it right between our tides. I think that just hits the spot. Iced coffee on a hot day here in Florida. I think that's just about perfect. Now we can continue on with the rest of our day. So one thing, particularly environmentally, that I think is really poignant to talk about here, particularly in St. Augustine, as well as so many communities along the East Coast here, is flooding. But there's one particular kind of flooding I want to talk about. So for this video, I want to talk about sunny day flooding. Now, what does it mean for sunny day flooding? It is exactly as it sounds, that there are flooding that happens during a sunny day. Now, how that happens, you ask? Well, it's a little complicated. As I said in my previous video about tides, you have low tides, you have high tides, but then you also have these things called spring tides. Spring tides happen when you have basically a extra high and extra low tide. And that usually happens when you have a full moon or a new moon, because that lines up with the sun, you get a higher tide. What that ends up meaning is that, corresponding as well with sea level rise, that ends up meaning that the stormwater drains will back up with this extra high tide, end up flooding the streets. And there are cases of this actually in North Carolina, as well as Charleston, two states that I'm very familiar with, that they are starting to get cities with more than 10 of these a year, and they're predicting that by 2050 or 2100 that this is going to be almost a weekly occurrence. And that is exactly happening right here in St. Augustine as well. that right now, yearly, it's about 10 to 12 days of this sunny day flooding. But particularly with sea level rise, it's only going to continue to get worse and more often. So, well, you're trying to wonder where sunny day flooding comes from? Well, it comes from right here. That this drain right here goes directly out to the waterways, which means that when the waterways get super high with a spring tide or just an exponentially high tide, a king tide, or just any tide, that as sea levels rise, the waterways are going to back up these storm drains and then end up on the streets. So that's how we end up, that we can have a perfectly sunny day, but then have water backing up to these storm drains here. And that could be a huge issue, because then with these backing up, there's nowhere for the water to go, so the water just has to sit in the streets until the tide recedes, or they try and pump it out. That can be a real issue, especially if it continues to happen more and more every single year. With 10 to 20 happening per year in some coastal cities, that they're predicting that could be every week or as much as 100 times a year. That could be a huge impact. And there's no way to mitigate that other than for some cities like Miami, that they're actually raising the entire roadways to then mitigate that coastal flooding, which is a huge infrastructure problem that not every city has the ability to do. It's so warm. Oh my gosh, it's so warm. You can judge me all you want about how I fold my laundry, but it's how I've done it for years. That was quite a storm last night, wasn't it? Oh, I am very tired now. Because once that storm started, I did not really sleep much more. However, goal for today is we are actually going to do a later start today. Because it is all about tides. And tides is going to be the name of the game going forward pretty much until we're done with this trip. Tides only get stronger, particularly when crossing inlets and going underneath bridges. So for today, we need to make sure that we're going to be going through St. Augustine Inlet, and we need to be going through it going north, so we need to come through it on a incoming tide, which means that we're going to have to wait till this afternoon. It's going to be a later day today, but it'll be easier when we ride the tide than trying to fight it like we did a few days ago. Then we'll continue on with the day. Well, hey, we're back on the water again. The wind is in our favor, mostly. The tide is in our favor. The wind is in our favor, the tide is in our favor. And we've got some time to make up because we are starting at 12:30 today for the tide. So we got some ground to make up. We're going about 15 miles today. It is an absolutely gorgeous day. Let's go have some fun. Weehaw. Now, continuing on our sunny day flooding bit, there is another issue with sunny day flooding that doesn't pertain to downtown city areas, but like a city out here. Let me show you. reason sunny day flooding pertains to them is because those houses are only a couple of feet above sea level, which can be a huge issue. That just that few extra inches of high tide is the difference between their house flooding and their house not flooding. And so, particularly for a lot of these houses, they aren't raised off the ground, they're not on stilts, and to raise a house costs upwards of $100,000, that money that people don't have. And so that can also be a huge issue for just low-lying communities, not even low-lying cities, but just entire communities along the entire East Coast that with these tides getting higher and also then the sunny day flooding happening more often, this could be a huge issue for a huge amount of communities. And there are really only two options, either build higher or retreat. And that's a tough decision that a lot of cities are starting to make now. So the fun thing we're about to do this time for overnight is something that we haven't done since the first round of this trip, is we're gonna try and anchor out tonight. Because there isn't a great place to pull up the boat and we're not going all the way to Jacksonville. So, and there's no marinas. So we're gonna try and anchor out. This came by a really good recommendation on Active Captain as well as a couple of other boaters. So we're gonna see how well I can remember how to anchor. Let's hope I remember. Yeah, that was a pretty good night. Didn't really move that much. Still next to the same fishing marker. And yeah, the boat held. That was great. A little nervous, but I think it did really well. Remind myself that I can know what I'm doing. And now we gotta pack up, head up to Jacksonville. But I'm really enjoying this morning though. I kinda don't wanna leave, other than the bugs. It's gonna be a little sketchy. We have to attempt a balloon rescue, or at least a nature rescue from a balloon, because I don't think anyone else is gonna get it. So let's see how this goes. Okay, that was success. Now we just need to get off these reeds. All right. Save nature from some balloons. Onward to Jacksonville. Quick break here going underneath this bridge. We're gonna check in. We have now gone probably 18 miles, coming up on 20. And we got a few miles left up to the Jacksonville City dock. But as you've seen, the wind has been considerably picked up. And it's not the best angle, but it's definitely workable. But we've also got the tide on our side, which is also great. But this has been a real test of my skill, my endurance, and working with the elements here. But I think we're gonna make dock before 5 o'clock.
Good luck getting the opportunity to fish, you should say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sweet.
So we meet again.
Absolutely. Have a good one, guys.
Yeah, we will probably see you again.
Those guys are pretty awesome. If you guys like fishing channels, I'll go ahead and link both of them down in the description as well. That they travel all over the East Coast here doing some amazing fishing and just talking about what it's like to live on the water. So I'll go and link Mike and Marty's pages down below as well. Now, one final note about flooding is that flooding affects everybody differently. Like, for some people, it's flooding their streets in their city, but their house is fine. There are other times for it could be from a storm that you can get, you know, storm overwash. And that only happens during big storms, hurricanes, things like that. But also, it happens at different paces. That sunny day flooding might start increasing at one rate in one city, but then be different in another. And so we can't use the same metrics across the board. Now, there is amazing amounts of great research that are being done to answer these questions. Like the International Panel on Climate Change, they are doing some great work, as well as there's a website that I'll go and link below, also called Surging Seas, I think, that breaks down this kind of information based on where you live along the coast. And so it's important to check what's happening in your local area, because that is the things that are going to affect you most. That the ice caps melting is definitely an issue, but that's not something that is directly affecting you. Oh shit, hold on. Oh shit. Now, as I was saying, flooding is a major issue in so many coastal communities, but there's different kinds of flooding, and so you need to be aware of the threats to your community. Whether it is sunny day flooding and it's coming up through the drains, or if it's just higher tide then it's coming over the banks of the Intracoastal where you're at, or up higher up on the beach. Or if it's not so much that, but it could be from stormwater surge. So it could be coming up from the beach or from the Intracoastal, from rivers during major storms, particularly during hurricanes. That could be a major issue. But you need to understand what's happening in your community, as well as, I think it's even better to then also figure out what's being done in your community, of what proposals are happening to combat this. both to mitigate the effects, to adapt to the effects, as well as then what changes are happening in the industries around you that influence your community that will then help reduce the effects of that just by helping reduce the effects of climate change. That are there things that you can be doing now or influencing your local industries to do that will then lessen the risk of sea level rise and then lessen the risk of flooding and all the things that come with that could then affect your community. So when it comes to like sea level rise, that's something that affects everybody in every coastal community. Alrighty everybody, we have made it to Amelia Island, we have docked up, we have set up, and we are good to go for the evening. But I'm gonna go ahead and leave things for this video here. If you like this video, go and give it a thumbs up, as well as go ahead and subscribe so you can continue to see more adventure videos as I go up the ICW. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them down in the comments, as well as if you have any recommendations on gear or questions I should be asking, or general thought processes about what it's like living on the coast and the changes that you've seen over time, let me know down below. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.